Alright, let's have this discussion. Reactors and reactions, and my reaction to them. So DarkViper AU, a creator that I'm sort of tangentially aware of, recently practically declared war on all reactors with a pretty aggressive document entitled How the React Grift Works. And I think he makes a lot of great points. He quite astutely sums up a lot of what I despise about reaction content. However, for every amazing point DarkViper puts forward, there is an equal and opposite dose of yikes, which we'll get into, but I think this is a discussion that has been a long time coming. Before I get into the insanity, in terms of where I stand, I have a bit of a love-hate reaction with reaction content. In terms of where I stand, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with reaction content. On the one hand, personally, it's usually just not my thing, especially in my primary niche, which is anime and manga. I just cannot stand watching people react to manga in particular. I find it so unbelievably boring. However, every now and then, I will find myself going down a react binge. The most recent one I can remember is watching a series of people reacting to the openings of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and a few years ago I do remember binging reactions to episode 19 of Demon Slayer, which, and even further back I can sort of vaguely recall watching people react to the first couple of seasons of Rick and Morty. So I do get the appeal of it, because when you've seen something and you know it's great, you just have that urge to see how other humans respond. That's one type of reaction video, and it's not the type that I'm primarily concerned with here. The type of reaction content I absolutely despise is when that dynamic gets flipped. When an audience is watching something for the first time with a reactor, which has become something of a meta on Twitch. You have these incredibly high-profile millionaire streamers such as Pokimane and Toast reacting to entire series on their channels. And I believe Toast was temporarily banned for streaming Death Note, and Pokimane got a significantly shorter ban for streaming Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is a phenomenal show, by the way. I love Avatar. But as an avid defender of fair use and the right to make transformative content, this just goes way too far and does nothing but make media companies more hostile to online personalities, whose livelihoods generally depend on being able to make content. Whereas if these high-profile streamers got wiped off the internet tomorrow, they would still be multimillionaires. I mean, Hassan Piker, for example, he made news a few months back because he bought a $2.7 million home in LA. They're pretty set for life, meaning that they have no real fear for the consequences that their actions could bring, so the goal becomes to push the boundaries as far as they possibly can, make as much money in what time will allow, and then get a slap on the wrist from Twitch. And in the meantime, they put a lot of us at risk, which is something that DarkViper identifies in his document. More importantly, the legal position of platforms like YouTube and Twitch are balanced on a razor's edge. All it would take is one significant legal challenge from a company to set precedent that could destroy this delicate balance and make all of our careers impossible. XQC, Hassan, Disguised Toast, etc. were recently gambling with the careers of tens of thousands of people in order to stream hundreds of episodes of TV shows, cartoons, and anime. And I do agree with this. They're allowed to gamble because they really have nothing to lose. It's not any of them that are going to suffer if one goes too far and ends up setting some sort of legal precedent. Individual creators at the top have the power to sway the course of an entire platform. I mean, for example, do we all remember Logan Paul filming a dead body in Japan? That incident completely revolutionized YouTube advertising as we know it. So all it takes is that one high-profile incident to irrevocably change the space. You know what though? I don't even think that's the real problem here. I don't have a lot of sympathy for large media groups, and if that's where these streamers stopped, then I don't think I'd be making this video. But another of the more lucrative avenues for massive streamers / YouTube reactors is to react to content made by independent creators, often several orders of magnitude smaller than they are. Now here's a great example. A YouTuber named JXE had one of their videos streamed by Hassan Piker, and instead of reacting to the video in question, Hassan got up, left the shot, and went away to make some food, leaving Jay's video playing on stream to entertain his audience, whilst his reaction to the content consisted of an empty chair. And whatever your feelings on reaction content is, I feel like we can all agree that that's not quite a reaction. In my opinion, it is more akin to blatant theft of content. Jay put time and effort into making that video. Hassan then took that video and used Jay's labor without permission to add value to himself. And there are all sorts of excuses that people throw around, the two predominant ones being, well, streamers need to take breaks, and, well, look, Jay's getting exposure, which, sure, streamers do need to take breaks. It is admittedly an incredibly tough job, but for someone who can afford an almost $3 million home, I feel like Hassan has the resources to pay someone to make that sort of filler content for his streams. It really is not that difficult. Like, pay a video editor to make a 10-minute Best of Hassan compilation, or maybe pay a comedian to film themselves telling some jokes, or a magician to film some magic tricks, whatever. That last one there is actually a strategy that I used once upon a time when working at a convention. We realized that lines to get in would be a much longer wait than we would have liked, so we contracted a magician to come out and entertain the people while they were waiting. The options are limitless. However, I believe the reason reason why they're unlikely to be explored is because they would cost both time and money. And honestly, time is more the concern. And this is where part of DarkViper's document really speaks to me when he states, "A reactor will take the labor of others from within the market without their consent and use it to compete with those same laborers. They take a video that took 500 hours of labor to make, spend 20 minutes watching it, and put it back into the market as something new, containing 500 hours and 20 minutes of labor. The reactor is able to bring forth higher quality content far faster than anyone else on the market. The result is that they take a greater portion of the pool of exposure for themselves than what their 1 hour of labor would normally be able to pull unassisted." And I think that this, at a conceptual level, is very true. Reactors possess what is probably the greatest ratio of time investment to quality outcome. In 1 hour, a reactor could present thousands upon thousands of hours of effort from other creators, which gives them an astonishing competitive advantage. Now, of course, it's not quite that simple. The reactor in question still needs to be capable of holding an audience, but they are significantly assisted by the content that they're reacting to. And all of this takes me back to someone like Jinx, who was a reactor who just sat there, laughed, and occasionally maybe spoke 10 words throughout a whole video, which I think is a great example of a reactor being carried by the content they're reacting to. And as DarkViper said, both reactors and original creators are competing in that same marketplace. So there is a huge risk of the reactor making the original video redundant, especially if the reactor is a big enough channel to actually eclipse the views and engagement of the original video. Because in that case, the reaction is actively taking the place of the original video. Now, one of the many areas where I do disagree with DarkViper is the one-to-one implication. The idea that every view a reactor is generating is a view stolen from the original video and therefore revenue and etc. That's far from the case. There's always going to be a lot of people who are never going to watch that original video, who only do so because their reactor is involved. And there's also the fact that a lot of these reactors are only allowed to do this because they already have massive followings from prior activities. So there's that huge chunk of people who never would have stumbled upon the original video without the reactor. And you might think, that's great. That's just added exposure for the original video. And the answer to that is, well, sort of. In the JXE example I mentioned earlier, Jay actually presented the data retained from Hassan streaming, and it amounted to more or less sweet FA in terms of exposure. Although I have to say in that case, it's particularly because Hassan didn't actually credit the video. But look, exposure is never a good argument to present to creative people. I've worked in theater for over a decade now, and one of the things that actors, designers, directors, writers, photographers, anyone is, the one thing that they always get promised is exposure. Not payment, not proper working hours, just the promise of exposure so that you can go on to be exploited by new people who find out you exist. But basically, exposure is worth a lot less than people may think. But DarkViper also has an argument when it comes to said exposure. A reactor can't make another person's content good. If your content is bad, no amount of reactions will save it. If your content is good, then it will get exposure naturally, and so you don't need reactors. I'm gonna do a bit of a flip here because that is incredibly optimistic and sadly untrue. You could make objectively the greatest video in the world on YouTube, but for any of hundreds of reasons, it just might not take off in the algorithm. Quality does not equal exposure, and while we're here, effort also does not equal quality. You could spend 10,000 hours on a video, that doesn't mean it'll be good, and if it is good, that doesn't mean that YouTube will surface it. So look, it's a murky area. Videos being good on their own won't necessarily lead to natural exposure. However, artificial exposure from huge streamers also doesn't necessarily help. The only people it does undeniably help are the streamers who are provided with content to feed their audiences and continue to amass absolutely insane amounts of wealth. Wealth generated from sitting in a chair and watching other people's stuff. Now, with all of that said, we should acknowledge reality as well, which is that if the marketplace didn't demand this content, then it wouldn't be made. These streamers definitely aren't lazy, but they're working smarter, not harder. They very correctly identified a desire for their reactions, and it's very hard to blame them for just giving the people what they want. But still, there has to be a line somewhere. Because even if there is a demand for this content, that doesn't necessarily make it the correct thing to do, especially when we discuss the issue of consent, which is a big part of DarkViper's document. Now we come to the issue of consent. While reactors dismiss the idea of paying workers for their labor or giving them a say over who can profit from it, they will also attack the idea of informed consent as a concept, stating that they will steal as much of a person's labor as they desire before the person finds out and tells them to stop. And I actually think it's a little bit worse than this, because if someone with that Hassan Piker or Pokimane level of following on stream reacts to your stuff and you don't like it, well, what are you really going to do about it? Are you going to make a fuss? Because what's going to happen? You're going to rile up thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of their loyal fans who will attack you through whatever avenue they can find. So there is a big imbalance of power here. Small creators who are having their content used to entertain larger ones really have no mechanism to fight back. They will get slaughtered in online discourse, and you're also not going to be able to challenge the multimillionaires on the legal front, so you just kind of have to sit there and take it. To which the reactors will say, well, if you had a problem with it, why didn't you say anything? Because they're either so out of touch with what it is to be a small creator, or they will understand perfectly well and are just using that as an excuse. Now, this is where we have to point out the rather yikes section of DarkViper's document, and I guess I'll just go ahead and read it. They know what they are doing, but just don't care. They may seem like nice people, but you'd be a bit nicer if you were making millions of dollars reposting other people's hard work for massive profits. If you met a reactor at a party, I suggest covering your glass or outright tell them you don't want them to fuck you, because they seem keen to take a person's silence for consent. And this section is, well, it's a bit indicative of the document in general. DarkViper makes a lot, and I mean a lot of great points, but then undermines everything with stuff like this. And I get what he's trying to say. What he's trying to do is an attempt at hyperbole to nail down a point, but it's just no. It's not anywhere near the same thing. And the implications of saying that is not only insulting and potentially defaming the people that he has named in this document, but also blatantly insulting to anyone who has ever experienced this situation being used as a hyperbole. Like, oh, you were sexually assaulted, were you? Oh, can relate. Because I once had a reactor watch my video on the internet without asking me. Like, it's just so unbelievably tone deaf. And because of that, this whole issue was transformed from a discussion about the legal, moral, and legitimacy issues of reaction content to DarkViper compares all reactors to sexual assaulters. And I should also say that this is a 14-page document, and I've left out a lot of stuff for the sake of brevity in trying to convey my thoughts. But it's also very clear that DarkViper has a deep personal dislike of the streamers that he mentions by name. A lot of it comes across with a large degree of personal bias, so it makes it harder to engage with the points, which is sad because I largely agree with the core of what he has to say. I mean, I don't agree with the assertion that all reactors are bad people leeching off the work of others, because to be clear, react is a very vague word. In many ways, the entire anime and manga community on YouTube could be considered react channels. My videos on Grand Line Review are at their core me reacting to One Piece. Whether they're discussions, theories, fun facts, well, it doesn't matter, it's all a reaction. And without One Piece, that channel wouldn't exist. But on the far end of the spectrum of react content, there does exist a class of exploiters. The sort of creators so large that they can quite literally just play people's videos on stream whilst they aren't even present to react to them. And to that, I don't know what the answer is. If their audiences continue to support them, then it's going to continue to happen. The only other option is to try and set a legal precedent by challenging them in court, which no small creator has the resources to do. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think of this whole react deal?